sadly, it's starting to become the normal around here. Wildfire smoke during the late summer months. Well, in a new book called Fire Weather, author John Vaillant takes a look at some of the real-life impacts of climate change. It's only getting warmer. John joins me now. Thank you for being here. This is something that we're hearing a lot about, but your book is an account of a wildfire that happened in Canada in 2016. Tell us about how that inspired you to write this book.
Well, the city that burned was Fort McMurray, and most Americans may not know about it, but 90,000 people live and work there. It's the petroleum hub of Canada. Most American imports come out of that town, and it was overrun by a boreal wildfire in 2016 in early May and resulted in the largest, fastest evacuation due to fire in modern times.
In modern times.
Yeah. It was major.
I can't even imagine something of that scale, but you talk about fossil fuels as well. You talk about how it is imperative that we understand fossil fuels for what they are, fire.
Yeah, I mean, climate scientists have been warning us about this since really the 1950s and 60s. Fossil fuels generate a lot of CO2 that insulates the atmosphere, effectively holding heat at surface level, dries out the forest, dries out the grasses, makes it much more conducive to fire. So we've burned a lot of fire in the form of fossil fuels, and now we've made the earth a more flammable place.
Like you said, this has been going on since the 1950s. I think it got researchers, folks overall, got more serious about it in the 1980s. And so now here we are at a time where we are starting to see some real change happen. We're seeing more electric cars, more efforts to be sustainable. What has your research shown about how we got to this place of still using fossil fuels when we have this available?
It's a transition, and I believe it's underway. It's going to be a slow process because the petroleum infrastructure is so huge and pervasive around the world. But people are realizing that, I mean, even oil fields and petroleum fields are being overrun by fire in Alberta. So it's pretty hard to do that when do that work when it's on fire. And I think people are starting to connect the dots, unfortunately, in some very painful ways. One recent example, State Farm Insurance has just said, no new fire insurance for new builds in the state of California.
In the whole state?
The whole state of California. Allstate has also just joined that group, and that is going to spread across the American West, across Western Canada, and it's really going to force people to focus on.
I hope it does. I also know there's a bit of politics involved in that too, because it is California, and there's some things with the insurance commissioner, but nonetheless, it doesn't change the fact that California has seen some incredible wildfires over the past 10 years. I personally covered them as a journalist.
Oh, wow.
And I will say that I have seen the difference over the years. In your opinion, how are wildfires different today than they were, let's say, in 1990?
I call it 21st century fire. Right around 2000, we saw new behaviors emerge. Hotter, faster, more explosive, more destructive. Redding, California had an actual EF3 fire tornado. It tore houses off the foundation. I mean, it was nuclear. I went there, and the damage, you cannot believe it. Way different than a house fire.
Yeah.
And so this new climate that we've basically created for ourselves is creating this much more explosive scenario that 1990s firefighting methods aren't prepared for. And so firefighters are really finding themselves in basically in evacuation scenarios rather than firefighting scenarios now.
And we've seen that. We've seen entire towns get destroyed. We've seen things that we never really thought were possible. There was always a fire line. We could always, the firefighters, wildland firefighters, and God bless them, they always kept that line, but now it's too much.
Exactly.
Moving forward, how should we think about people who are forced to relocate because of wildfires and climate change? Because I know that is an issue. You mentioned people not being insured in California. There's certain places that you just can't afford to live in, safety and financially.
And that goes with flood insurance too, along the coast and certain riparian areas. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to call these people, if not climate refugees, they're climate relocatees. You know, they are being forced to change the way they live and where they live because of changes in climate that have been predicted, again, for decades now. And we're really seeing these effects in real time,
Yeah.
and they're affecting real lives. And that's what I think is really so difficult, is that the idea that it could happen to me.
Yeah.
That happens to people in Southern California, that happens to people in Canada, but now more and more of us are joining that club of people who've been impacted in really visceral, personal ways.
Very much so, and it is going to start affecting more and more of us. Thank you so much for sharing this information with us and for writing this book. And of course, just a reminder, John is holding an author event tonight, June 6th at 7 p.m. at Elliott Bay Book Company.